And we thank you for allowing us to be with you and to share this time, especially in the middle of the afternoon when everybody's yawning. So we'll keep it lively as best we can. In your packet is a handout for this session. It's called The Quest to Broaden Our Cultural Understanding. You'll want to have that on hand so that the teacher and Carol can use that to keep you on task. There are also some discussion questions that are listed on it that we'll be using a little bit later in our presentation. I'd like to introduce to you Carol Selly, the chairman of the Heart to Heart Sisters of All Nations Committee here for the LWML. She'll begin our presentation.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be with you. And the first thing, if you had gotten out that worksheet, you will see that it says, "And the truth is known." I want to tell you a true story. And I'm sorry, Michigan people, but this happened in Michigan. Well, my husband was a missionary of the LCMS, and he was a missionary in North America, and his job was moved to that foreign land of Michigan. Trust me. And no, it was wonderful there. I learned so much. And his job was to begin international student ministries at the 6 universities in southern Michigan. And so we moved to Michigan, and I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything, but I ended up being Carl's best volunteer. Yes. So what happened is that I was often invited to go to LWML groups, because they would invite me. I was a new speaker, kind of. I could talk about international student ministry. Well, on this particular evening, I invited 2 women to go with me. Jana from the Czech Republic and Sumiko from Japan. Now they both came and they said, "We'd be happy to go with you and share what international student ministry has meant in our lives coming to America." And so I got in the car and away we went. And this LWML meeting happened to be a dinner meeting in a restaurant. So we got there and it was fine. And the person that was in charge welcomed us into the restaurant, and there were chairs and tables. And so we started to mingle. Well, I watched, and it was very interesting because guess who the American women went to? Jana. She is the American Barbie doll version. She was very tall and very smart and very beautiful. And one woman came to Sumiko, my Japanese friend. Only one. I just kind of really hung out with her because nobody came to talk to her. Well, so the evening went, and now it was time to sit down for dinner. Good plan. So I had Jana on one side of me and Sumiko on the other. And wouldn't you know it, there was an empty chair next to Sumiko. Nobody sat there. So the last woman finally arrived at this meeting, a little late, but we hadn't eaten yet. And guess what? She looked around, and the only chair that was left was next to Sumiko. And you know what she did? When she sat down, and Sumiko's here. No, Sumiko, I'm the lady. Got it? And Sumiko was here. The lady sat down and did this. That was my reaction. My LWML sister did that to one of my dear friends. So I thought, okay, Carol, it's okay. And so I introduced this woman to Sumiko, just did a little, chat with her. And I thought, okay, Lord, you've got to take care of this one. So what I did is, it was now my turn to speak. So I got up and I did my little spiel about international student ministry. And Jana got up and she talked and shared her story about how she had been involved. And then Sumiko, in really good English, got up and told her story and being part of international student ministry. Well, it was interesting then to watch the woman that had turned her back to Sumiko. She slowly started to sit up better, and finally she looked at Sumiko, and it was like, and she smiled, Whoa, how cool. So then there was a question and answer time. Well, you know, most of the questions again went to Yana. Okay, but Yana was a very intelligent woman. And what she would do was to ask Sumiko, Sumiko, can you share your ideas about that question too? And so Sumiko had a more opportunity to share. Well, finally, then it was time when we were going to get dessert then. And the woman next to Sumiko, I guess, decided, I can talk to her. She can speak English really well. And so this lady next to her began to talk to her. And it was so wonderful to see the change in her. But the most amazing thing that happened was on our drive home. The conversation was about the evening, and Sumiko stated, I now understand Americans. Americans want to be friendly, but they are really just afraid of someone who doesn't look like them, who they've never encountered probably in their entire life. And I thought, that is really astounding, you know? So what Deaconess Betty and I are going to do this afternoon in our time is that we want to lead you through some information to help each of us broaden our cultural experiences and learn not to be afraid. Thanks, George.
You know, the LCMS was established in 1847 by immigrants from Germany seeking a place where they could practice confessional Lutheranism in safety. In our 175-year history, we've continued to be a church that welcomes people of all nationalities. Our predominantly German church founders experienced life in a new country with new cultural norms. Today, we welcome people of all nationalities as a part of the body of Christ. In 2020, the Heart to Heart Sisters of All Nations Committee used the LCMS Locator, a web-based service available on the LCMS website, to compile a listing of churches in each LCMS district who are involved in ministry to various ethnic groups, or provide an English as a second language course through their congregation, or host worship services in various languages. We found ministry being done in 9 different ethnic groups according to the locator. Everything from African immigrant to Eurasian immigrant to South American immigrant to Western immigrant. The locator also gave us information about worship services being held in 21 different languages. These languages included everything from Asian Indian to Chinese and Ethiopian and Filipino and Korean, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, and many, many more. And finally, research was done on congregations who held English as a second language classes at their church. These churches may or may not have a ministry with a specific ethnic group, but they do have a heart for outreach with our immigrant neighbors by providing this program for them. The founding fathers of the LCMS knew what it was like to be persecuted in their homeland for their faith, and also knew the joys and trials of immigrating to another country. Still today, our church seeks to reach out to our new neighbors who have moved to our country in pursuit of freedom and a new way of life. Through our connections, we can have opportunities to share the saving message of the salvation through Jesus Christ with our neighbors. Carol?
On your worksheet, the next section, number 3, is called What is Culture? And if you have your pens, we're going to do a little fill in the blank thing here. Oh, I remember they told me I could watch there. What is culture? Culture is often defined as the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, social habits, music, and arts. And I love this next statement about culture. Basically, it's the way We do things around here. This could include various ethnic cultures, different people groups, or people who have visual or hearing impairments, or mental or physical challenges. An intercultural effective person is someone who is able to live contently and work successfully in and or with another culture. Interculturally effective people have an ability to communicate with people of another culture in a way that earns their respect and trust. These people have the capacity to adjust personally and be content and generally at ease with the host culture. Intercultural effectiveness, and listen to these carefully, does not mean knowing and using frequently the language of another culture, abandoning your own culture, merely going to a Mexican restaurant, having an Oktoberfest, or making lanterns for the Lunar New Year. And the last one I have is jumping to conclusions about the reasons behind the behaviors of people from another culture. So those were the intercultural effectiveness does not mean things. So every time you go now to a Chinese restaurant or one of those kind of restaurants, you go, oh, but this is not really being cultural. Our goal with this presentation is to open our eyes to the different cultures around us, including learning about what are the cultures in our lives, the cultures in our groups, the cultures in our neighborhoods, the cultures in our church. Remember, culture is the way we do things around here. And I'm going to give you some examples. Let's think about some different cultures that are a part of our everyday life. In our country, Americans love to meet new friends. I think that's true about Americans. Usually we're open. On the west coast of the US, they would say, we hardly ever wear business suits. Every day is a casual day. Among those who speak my language, Americans say exactly what's on their mind, and I like it without thinking. I added that. At our workspace, this would be in Japan, and they did this in China too. We start our days at Toyota with group exercise outside and singing the company song. Yeah. And at our church, I love this one, which isn't true, I don't think of us. We clap and shout hallelujah when we sing in church. She does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Another way to define culture is that culture is a way of life. And this was from the books that we were using. We Minnesotans spend our summer weekends at the lake. A set of social practices, and this would be Japanese. We Japanese bow to greet others and show our respect for them. A system of values. And Chinese people, I have learned, the Chinese friends, live frugal lives so they can invest all of their long-term welfare for their children. A shared history or set of experiences. And this one is, we Floridians have lived through dozens of hurricanes and we're not afraid of them. As a family, we open presents on Christmas Eve or morning. As a congregation, it might be, we have Easter service sunrise services at the beach. It could be a way of life. Culture is also associated with a country, a region of the world, a religion, or a nationality. But culture may also extend beyond these types of borders. A person can also consider oneself a member of more than one culture. Culture is the way we do things around here. Oops, Betty, I got you. Sorry, going back. Skip that one. The way we do things around here. So, list your cultural identity. So the next thing, I believe, on your sheet is, I know, it says, oh, good, but I don't, it's up, oh, sorry. So in your LWML group, what is your culture like? My LWML group, we meet, we discuss, we have dessert. So the next one, your congregation. At my church, we have communion every Sunday. And I want to say, and people sit in the same pew every Sunday. Your community. We host many events throughout the year. Is that okay? That beep, beep? Okay. All right, the next one. Your personal or faith life. At my house, no one eats dessert until the person who made it takes a bite. Well, I always made the dessert, and so that was, demolished before I even got my plate on my plate. So that was the rule in our house. Your family or community celebrations. In my family, we often open our presents on Christmas Eve, never on Christmas morning. So now with your pen, fill in your cultural, the way it's done here in your life about your LWML group, your congregation, your community, your personal family life, your family or community celebrations. So you don't have to think deeply about it, but all of you have those cultures. All right, and then you're gonna share those with your group. And then there are some discussion questions on your handout. If you get through finishing your other cultures, then you can go to those discussions. And I believe you're going to have 5 minutes. Have you ever studied another language? And realized later on that by studying that language, you understood English better. Yeah. Thank you. The same is often true when people learn about other cultures. When we visit another country or get to know a person well from a different cultural background, we often find ourselves learning more about our own culture. And Ethan is better.
Thank you, Kara. We live in a world today where we may have opportunities to interact with people from other cultures, and it's important for us to work at understanding each other. I came across a little book that helps to explain some of the different ways people say and do things. The little book was called Foreign to Familiar by Sarah Lanier. I suppose it's my turn to play with the button. There you go. All right. She begins by making a couple of big generalizations, and please realize these are big generalizations. She uses those to help explain why some cultures do things the way that they do. She uses the analogy of hot and cold climates to help explain the different cultures. To her, the hot cultures, which are basically the Latin cultures, from the regions of the southern part of the US, Asia, Pacific Islanders, South America, except for Argentina, she says, Africa, the Mediterranean countries, the Middle East, except for the Jewish population in Israel, and most of the rest of the world. The cold climates she talks about are the Northern Europeans. Those are considered the cold climate. That would be regions like Canada, the northern states of the US, Northern European, like Switzerland and North. Israel, the Jewish population that came from Europe, and the populations of New Zealand, Australia, and southern Brazil, and the wide population of South Africa and other countries largely settled by the Europeans. Lanier went on to explain some of the personality traits of hot and cold climate peoples. First, she looked at people who were related with a relationship basis and those who were considered task-oriented. Am I in the right spot? I can't read my notes. My hot, okay, thank you. She explained these differences with a story about Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter. And her story was that President Jimmy Carter was frustrating the Western press immensely when he met with Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Israel's Menachem Begin for peace talks. As the media waited with bated breath for their breaking news story, the three heads of state sat behind closed doors drinking coffee. One day passed, then two, and the only news being that of angry reporters wanting to know why no progress reports were coming forth. Meanwhile, inside, the three men were getting to know each other's names, the names of each other's children and grandchildren. Relationships were being established, and trust was being built. After 3 days, a new relationship was formed, and the Camp David Accords were the fruit of that relationship. Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer from the South Georgia, is a hot climate man. He knows all about not rushing the deal. To this day, he carries the honor and respect of being one of the most effective mediators with hot climate leaders around the world. Whether it's Liberia or North Korea, he had the neatest skills. They came naturally to him. President Carter knew to get peace. President Carter knew to get a peace accord, he would have to take the time to develop a relationship between world leaders, not force a quick, efficient decision, since relationship is the basis of everything, even in this work setting. Secondly, she goes on and discusses the indirect and direct communication styles. I wish I could see better in a distance and I could actually read what I had down there, but I'm guessing I'm close. Okay. In cultures valuing relationships, like hot cultures, being indirect is not only a way of avoiding offending the other person, but also a way of making sure that in no way is one's own preference imposed on the other person. A cold climate person who values accuracy will be direct in her communication style. The author offered this as an example of asking for a ride. She wrote, "A person is driving to town and a friend asks if he or she can have a ride. The driver, if indirect, will say something like, 'I'd love to give you a ride, but I'm not sure how much space we will have. The car holds 5 people and 6 people have already asked, but maybe we can squeeze you in.' He's probably sure he doesn't have enough space, but he doesn't dare say so. In contrast, in cold climate cultures, saying exactly what you think is the way of respecting the other person's need for accurate information. 'I'm sorry, but we're full.' It's not a rejection, it's just information." In our cold climate way of thinking, we probably get frustrated and say, "Well, why doesn't his yes mean yes and his no mean no?" The answer is that the goal of the speaker is friendliness, and this isn't about information, it's about friendliness. There you go. See, I'm finally going to catch up with myself. One other area that the author discussed was the different concepts of time and planning. The cold climate societies have a goal of being efficient, getting the job done, and planning the job in advance. Hot climate people tend to be responders to what life brings, rather than trying to plan life. The example used by the authors was of one of a wedding, and that the event was a wedding. Her story is, the location is Jamaica, Zimbabwe, Colombia, or the Philippines. The wedding is to start at 2 p.m. At 1:45, 4 Norwegians and 2 Canadians show up to take their seats before the wedding starts. They find the church locked up and no one around except for some children that were out back playing. "Excuse me, kids, is this the place the wedding is taking place?" "Oh yes, there's a wedding today." A bit worried that there really is to be a wedding, the guests wait on the steps. At 1:55, a group of women arrives with flowers, and they unlock the church and start decorating. A choir master comes in a few minutes later and starts getting out the choir robes. By 2:30, a few people arrive, hanging around and talking outside. The cold climate guests have found seats and by now keep looking at their watches, becoming frustrated that the wedding is getting started late, and no one seems to care. What they don't know is that at around 2 o'clock, the bride started getting ready. The preacher started a meal with the groom's parents, and a young man started his 5-kilometer walk to the church. Stopped along the way by an old man, this young man takes as long as the old man wants to talk. It would have been dishonoring for him to tell the older man that he needed to hurry. Gradually, the crowd arrives. The choirs practicing and those who are choir members join the practice one by one as they arrive. Soon, the choir begins to sing and the festivities come to life. Around 3:45, the bride and groom finally arrive and the ceremony begins. By 6 o'clock, the wedding is in full swing. This hot climate wedding was an event, and the event began at 2 o'clock. That was when people stopped what they were doing and began wedding activities, getting the church decorated, entertaining the groom's family, and washing the children to get them dressed for the occasion. The event had begun. The cold climate guests were frustrated. They expected the bride to start down the aisle at 2 p.m. Before 2, according to their reasoning, everyone should have been in their places at the church and ready to start the wedding. To the hot climate people, the wedding did begin at 2 p.m. The event began with all of the activity that surrounded it. The ceremony was only a small part of that event. From this example, it's clear that both parties have a different understanding of time. The hot climate cultures have the reputation for always being late, and the cold climate people who are viewed as being neurotically time-oriented, especially by their hot climate friends. We all have to realize that we're not talking about right and wrong. Both ways are just different. Learning to appreciate a different culture begins with some understanding and an openness to continue learning. There are a couple of discussion questions on your guide. The first being, why is it important to broaden our cultural understanding? And the second, what are some ways we can be open to other cultures and different ways of doing things? We'll give you about 5 minutes to talk at your tables.
The next part, part 6, helps for crossing cultural lines in open communication. On your handout are a list of questions that were written to give you ideas or questions to ask a guest, such as international students or community women from different cultural backgrounds. These questions can open you to a whole new world of communication and friendship with your ethnic friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. With someone close to you, I'm going to trust you to do this. I don't need to read these to you, but you're going to read them to each other because I think you need to hear the questions, and who knows, you may be able to use one even in this hotel. You never know. All right, so when you will have 5 minutes. Betty set the time, by the way. You will only have 5 minutes. So with someone close to you, you will read the questions for invited guests, and then you will go to cross-cultural conversation starters. All right, ready, get set, go. Okay, you have one more conversation helper that was in your packet behind this one that you have, the worksheet called Tips for Making Cross-Cultural Friendships. And two of the Heart-to-Heart sisters that were trained in Lexington put this together for us. One was Linda Patel from CNH, and we have Heidi Norton. Heidi, would you stand up, please? Who put this together for us. Thank you very much. And so, Betty, you will continue.
Where did that go? Is that where I'm supposed to be? I sure hope so. Looks like the right words. All right. So connecting with the ethnic women in your congregation is really as simple as inviting them, welcoming them, being open to learning from and sharing with them, being intentional about connecting with women and connecting them with the mission of the LWML. So how do you share how important it is being involved in LWML for you? Have you ever thought of developing your elevator speech? You know, basically your elevator speech is answering the questions, what does it mean to you to be involved in the LWML? What's your why? And it probably takes you about as much time as it does from the lobby to your floor in the hotel. That's your elevator speech. You know, a number of years ago, I was at a convention, I believe it was the convention in Minneapolis, when I witnessed what I called a missed opportunity. It was some of our LWML women. They were sitting in the lobby. I was sitting there as well, kind of off to the side. I, of course, had a meeting to go to or something as equally exciting. And I observed this group of about 3 or 4 LWML ladies that were sitting there. The convention was over, and they were talking about just how much fun they had at the convention, sharing stories about all their after-hours antics as well. And near them sat a single woman who was well-dressed and pretty much in business attire, and she was listening to their conversation. And when there was a break in the chatter, she asked them what event they were discussing. Well, the ladies proudly told her that they had been attending the LWML convention. Well, the woman looked puzzled and followed her initial question with a second one asking, "What's the LWML?" Well, the ladies looked at each other, and then one of them turned and said to her simply, "We collect mites." Then the ladies went back to their animated chatter about what they'd had for lunch and how soon their bus was coming. The other woman went back to her book with a confused look on her face, and I could just tell that she really had no idea what they were talking about. The businesswoman had left the door wide open for the LWML women to speak of the hope they have in Jesus, but all they talked about was the fun that they had at convention and "we collect mites." It was a missed opportunity, not just to talk about the LWML, but more importantly, to talk about our Savior. We want to give you a chance to kind of figure out what's your why. What's the reason you are involved in LWML? If you're asked about your involvement, how would you explain that to someone else and why it is important to you? So take just a few minutes. My timer will go off in 3 minutes this time. And talk to each other and reflect on what are some of the key points about what's important to you being involved in the LWML. Okay? Thank you for taking some time to share about what's your why with those that are sitting at your table. You know, there probably are just about as many reasons for why you are involved in LWML as there are individual people in this room, and that's really great. We know that no one wants to be involved in a dying group, and we all want to be a part of something living that has purpose. And LWML has a purpose. We, as Lutheran Women in Mission, we joyfully proclaim Christ, support missions, and equip women to honor God by serving others. So if you are ever asked what LWML is all about, our mission statement is really a clear and concise way to share the core of what we're about. We proclaim Christ. We support missions. We equip women to honor God and serve others. We can do this with our friends. We can do this with people we meet who might come from a different culture. We just want to be open to cultivating relationships and inviting people, and women in particular, to be a part of the LWML. Thank you for your attention.